Billionaire catches Nanny singing to his paralyzed son, and what happens next shocks everyone. The soft melody drifted through the hallway like a forgotten memory. Alexander Vale paused mid-step, his briefcase still in hand, his tailored suit rumpled from a long day in boardrooms. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. Meetings had ended early, and for once he had driven himself instead of letting his driver take the wheel. Now standing outside his son's bedroom, he heard something he hadn't expected. A woman's voice, low and tender, singing an old lullaby in perfect pitch. His brow furrowed. No one sang in this house. Not since the accident. He crept closer, his expensive Italian shoes silent against the polished marble floor. The door was ajar, the light inside soft and golden. He peeked in, and what he saw rooted him to the spot. There she was, the new nanny, Amelia. Barely a month into the job, young, unassuming, always polite. She knelt beside the wheelchair, one hand gently wrapped around his son's small fingers, the other resting lightly on her chest as she sang. Her eyes were closed, the music flowing from her like a memory too deep for words. And there was Liam, 8 years old, paralyzed from the chest down since the accident that took his mother. Unmoving, silent, always staring out the window as if the world no longer included him. Except now his lips curved ever so slightly, a ghost of a smile, and his hand moved. A twitch, subtle, barely there, but real. Alexander's breath caught. He hadn't seen Liam smile in 3 years. His fingers slipped from the briefcase handle, letting it drop softly to the floor. A quiet clunk. Amelia's eyes opened in alarm, and she turned sharply, startled. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them felt electric, charged with something neither could name. She stood quickly, cheeks flushed, her hands falling to her sides. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry I didn't hear you come in." But Alexander wasn't listening to her apology. He was still looking at Liam, and Liam was still smiling. Alexander stepped into the room, his movements slow, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too fast. He crouched beside Liam, studying his son's face, searching for any hint that what he'd just witnessed was a trick of the light or his own desperate imagination. But the faint smile was still there, and Liam's fingers, though still now, seemed softer, less clenched than before. "Did he—" Alexander's voice came out raw, unsteady. He looked up at Amelia, who stood awkwardly beside the chair, wringing her hands. She nodded, her eyes wide, vulnerable. "He moved when I was singing. Just a little. I wasn't sure if it was real." Alexander's gaze hardened with a mix of disbelief and hope. "He hasn't responded to anything in 3 years. Not physical therapy. Not speech therapists, nothing." "I know," she said softly. "I read his file, but sometimes when I sing, it's like something stirs in him. It's not always visible, but I feel it." Alexander stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the endless stream of highly trained specialists who had offered only silence and invoices. "You're not a therapist. You're barely out of college." "I'm not trying to be a therapist," she replied gently. "I'm just trying to be human with him." A silence hung between them. Then Alexander turned back to his son, brushing a hand through the boy's soft blonde hair. "Liam, if you can hear me, give me something, son." Nothing, not a blink, not a twitch. And then, just as Alexander started to lean away, Liam's fingers shifted again, barely, but unmistakably. Amelia let out a quiet gasp. Alexander recoiled slightly, his expression unreadable. "How?" he whispered. "I don't know," Amelia said. "But I think he hears the music. I think he feels it. And maybe it's reaching something that words and doctors can't." Alexander stood slowly, conflicted emotions tearing across his face, wonder, skepticism, guilt. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control, and for a man like him, that was terrifying. He turned toward her. "Sing again." Amelia hesitated. "Now?" He nodded. So she knelt again beside Liam, her voice trembling slightly as she began the same lullaby. And this time, Alexander didn't just watch his son. He watched her. The way she sang, not for praise, not for performance, but like the song came from somewhere deeper than she could explain. And Alexander realized something he hadn't expected to feel again. He felt hope. That night, Alexander sat alone in the study, the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. A half-drunk glass of scotch sat untouched on the mahogany desk. In his hand he held an old photograph, Liam as a toddler, sitting on his mother's lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. That was before the accident, before the quiet swallowed the house whole. He remembered the night it happened in excruciating detail, rain pouring in sheets on the windshield, Elizabeth's voice on the phone, bright and teasing. "You're working late again, Mr. Billionaire," she'd joked. And then, nothing. Just the screech of tires, metal on metal, sirens. She died on impact. Liam had survived, but not whole. Doctors said it was a miracle he lived. Spinal trauma, emotional shock, partial paralysis. He might never respond to stimuli again, one of them had said clinically, as if talking about a machine, not a child. And Alexander, he hadn't known how to cope. So he worked. He built more empires, bought more companies, filled the silence with board meetings and mergers. But the silence inside Liam's room only deepened. Until today. He replayed the scene in his mind, Amelia singing, Liam's faint smile, the tiny movement of his fingers, and something else he hadn't wanted to admit, the way his heart had clenched when he saw Amelia's hand wrapped around his son's. She had reached Liam in a way he never could. Was it just the music or something about her? He rubbed his temples. His mind was a battlefield of doubt and longing. That song, it wasn't just any lullaby. It was the one Elizabeth used to hum to Liam when he couldn't sleep. He hadn't heard it in years. How did Amelia know it? He pulled up the nanny agency file on his computer. Amelia Grace, 26, degree in early childhood education. No record of prior contact with his family. No red flags, just ordinary. But something didn't add up. He stared at the screen, then at the photo again. And for the first time he wondered, what exactly had brought Amelia to them? And why did she know a lullaby no one else should? The next morning, Alexander descended the staircase with an unusual sense of urgency. His phone buzzed with messages, but he ignored them. He had one goal, to understand who Amelia really was and what her connection to that song might be. He found her in the sunroom, sitting beside Liam's chair once again. She wasn't singing now, just talking softly to the boy as she held a small picture book between them. Her fingers brushed over the pages like she was reading to someone who could still turn the pages himself. He cleared his throat. She turned quickly, startled but didn't rise. "Good morning, Mr. Vale." "I want to talk," he said, more gruffly than intended. She nodded and followed him into the adjacent library, a warm, wood-paneled room that felt as closed off as the man who inhabited it. He gestured for her to sit, then stood across from her, arms crossed. "How do you know that song?" She blinked, thrown by the sudden directness. "Excuse me?" "The lullaby, the one you sang to Liam. It wasn't random. My wife used to sing that to him before bed. It's not in any of his therapy notes, it's not public. How do you know it?" Amelia looked down at her hands, her breath catching. "I didn't mean to upset you. Just answer the question." She met his gaze, finally. "My mother used to sing it to me when I was little." Alexander's posture stiffened. "Your mother?" "She told me it was a song she learned while working for a family a long time ago. She was a housekeeper. Said she'd never forget the tune. It was special to someone." Alexander's mind raced. He remembered a housekeeper named Marlene, quiet, kind. She'd worked for them years ago when Elizabeth was still pregnant. She left abruptly, no explanation. Elizabeth had seemed shaken by it, but never explained why. He narrowed his eyes. "What was your mother's full name?" "Maria Elena Graciela. She passed away 2 years ago." The room went silent. Alexander's voice was low now. "Did your mother ever tell you who that family was?" Amelia hesitated. "No, just that she wished she could have stayed longer. But something happened and she had to go. Alexander stared at her, the pieces slowly clicking into place. Too many coincidences. Too many things unsaid. Someone had kept something from him, from Liam, and it hadn't just been the song. Because behind Amelia's calm eyes, there was a story she hadn't told yet. And suddenly he realized he wasn't the only one searching for answers. Later that afternoon, Alexander stood by the massive window overlooking the garden, hands deep in his pockets, watching Liam and Amelia through the glass. She sat on the bench beside the wheelchair, telling a story with her hands as much as her voice, full of gestures and warmth. Liam didn't move, but his eyes were open, focused. That, in itself, was a quiet miracle. Alexander's mind wasn't on the present, though. It was tangled in memories, in loose threads that suddenly felt important. Why had Marlene, Maria Elena, left so suddenly? He'd been away on business. Elizabeth had handled it. When he returned, Marlene was gone. And Elizabeth never spoke of it again. He walked to his private office and opened a locked drawer. Inside, a weathered envelope he hadn't touched in years. It was one of the few things Elizabeth had insisted he keep. Just in case, she had said. Inside was an old Polaroid. A woman in a maid's uniform, Marlene, holding a newborn baby, smiling down at him. Beside her stood Elizabeth, hand on the woman's shoulder, looking tired and sad. On the back, in Elizabeth's handwriting, "She sang to him before I could." Alexander sat down slowly, the photo trembling in his fingers. Why would Elizabeth keep this? And why had Amelia, Marlene's daughter, found her way back here, to his son, his house? He didn't believe in fate. But this felt orchestrated. Suddenly, a knock at the office door. It was Amelia, holding something in her hands. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "No," Alexander replied. "Come in." She stepped forward and placed a small velvet box on his desk. "I found this behind Liam's bookshelf. It must have fallen." He opened it, and inside, resting on the blue velvet, was a silver music locket. It hadn't played in years. He recognized it instantly. Elizabeth's. It had belonged to her grandmother. She used to wind it and place it on Liam's crib when he was a baby. He turned the key carefully. The same lullaby filled the room. Amelia gasped. "That's it. That's the song." Alexander looked up sharply. "You've heard this version before?" Her face had gone pale. "No, I've never heard the melody from this box, only from my mother. But it's the same, exactly the same." They stared at each other, the music soft between them, a thread binding two lives from opposite directions. In that moment, something shifted, because the locket wasn't just a trinket, it was proof that the past wasn't as distant as he thought. And maybe, just maybe, Amelia's arrival wasn't a coincidence at all. "Great, ready to move on to part 2. Block 1, let me know if you'd like to continue, or if you want to pause or adjust anything before we go forward." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden beams across the breakfast table. For once, Liam wasn't alone at breakfast. Amelia sat beside him, gently coaxing him to taste a spoonful of yogurt. His hand didn't move to take the spoon, but his lips parted slightly. A small gesture, but for Alexander, who stood silently in the doorway watching them, it felt monumental. He hadn't slept much. All night, the music box had played over and over in his mind, the photograph still resting on his desk, the faces frozen in time. Amelia's resemblance to Marlene was subtle, but unmistakable now that he saw it. Something about the way her eyes softened when she looked at Liam. That kind of affection couldn't be faked. As Amelia dabbed the corner of Liam's mouth with a napkin, she glanced up and saw Alexander. "He liked it," she said softly. "He opened his mouth," Alexander replied, trying not to sound too astonished. "That's something." She nodded, then hesitated. "I didn't come here just to work, Mr. Vale. I think you already know that." He walked into the room, pulled out a chair, and sat. "Tell me everything." Amelia took a breath. "My mother never told me much." Only that when she was younger, she worked for a woman who was kind but afraid. She said the house was beautiful but lonely, that the woman was pregnant, and something happened between them, something that made her leave. She never gave me names. Did she know you'd find your way here? I don't think so, but when she was dying, she gave me a box. Inside was a letter and a photograph of her and a woman I now recognize as your wife. Alexander's jaw tightened. I need to see that letter. Amelia nodded. I brought it with me. I wanted to give it to you after I was sure, after I knew Liam was the boy she once held in her arms. Alexander leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped, and for the first time since Elizabeth's death, he felt the faint tremor of something old and unfinished rising to the surface. Not grief, not guilt, but the undeniable pull of truth demanding to be seen. Amelia returned to the room minutes later, holding a weathered envelope with careful hands. The edges were worn, the paper yellowed slightly with time. She offered it to Alexander without a word, her expression a mix of nervousness and resolve. He took it silently, sat back down, and opened it with a precision that betrayed his apprehension. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The cursive was delicate, unmistakably feminine. He began to read aloud, his voice low and steady. Dear Amelia, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you. There are things I never told you, not out of shame, but out of fear. I once worked for a woman named Elizabeth Vale. She was kind, broken in places, but strong. She was pregnant and alone most of the time. Her husband was away often, building an empire. Alexander stopped. His fingers clenched the page, a flicker of guilt tightening in his chest. He continued. I sang to her child when he was still inside her. I held him when she was too tired to get out of bed. She trusted me, but she was hiding something, or someone. I don't know what, but one day after a phone call, she told me to leave and never come back. She hugged me hard before I walked out, whispered, "One day the music will find its way back." I didn't understand then, but I think I do now. Amelia, if you ever hear that lullaby again, follow it. You belong to that child's story, just like I did. Tears prickled at the corners of Alexander's eyes. He folded the letter slowly, reverently. She knew, he said, more to himself than to Amelia. Elizabeth knew something was going to happen. She just never told me. I think she protected you in her own way, Amelia said gently. And Liam too. He looked at her, his voice softening. And you? Why did you come here, really? I needed to know why my mother never stopped talking about this place, she said. I didn't expect Liam. I didn't expect the song. But once I sang it and saw him react, I knew I had to stay. Alexander leaned back, overwhelmed by the truth unraveling in front of him. All these years he thought he had buried everything with Elizabeth. But now the past was resurfacing, not as a ghost but as a bridge. And sitting across from him was the only person who seemed to know how to cross it. The following days passed in a strange quiet. Not the cold, clinical silence that had filled the house for years, but something gentler, like the hush before a storm or a prayer. Alexander began spending more time at home, cancelling meetings, asking his assistant to reschedule flights. His empire would wait. For the first time, something more important demanded his attention. Each morning, he watched Amelia with Liam. She didn't do anything extraordinary. No complex therapy techniques, no structured exercises. She simply talked, sang, read stories, held his hand. And each day, something subtle shifted in Liam. His eyes tracked movement more clearly. His lips twitched more often. He responded faintly to certain words, especially when Amelia used his name. One evening, as the sky turned lavender outside, Alexander stepped into Liam's room with a small photo album. He sat beside the wheelchair, carefully placing it on Liam's lap. "These are for you," he said softly. Liam's gaze drifted downward, his fingers unmoving. Alexander flipped the pages slowly. "This was your mom on our wedding day. That's her in the garden. She used to take you out here every morning, even when you were barely crawling." Amelia stood at the doorway, watching quietly. Alexander continued. And this? He turned to a photo of Liam at age 2, sitting in a pile of autumn leaves. This was the last photo we took before everything changed. A flicker crossed Liam's face, a soft tightening of the brow. Then, barely perceptible, his right hand moved. Just a tremor. But it landed gently on the edge of the photo. Alexander froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Amelia stepped forward, eyes wide. He touched it. Alexander turned to her. "It's the memory. He remembers." Amelia knelt beside Liam, placing a hand over his. "You remember your mother, don't you?" Liam's eyes welled with moisture, a single tear sliding down his cheek. Alexander watched in stunned silence. For years he'd begged doctors for progress, paid for specialists, flew in experts. And now, here, through song, story and presence, Liam was reaching back. And maybe, finally, beginning to return. It was late that night when Alexander received the call. He stood in his study, Amelia sitting quietly across from him, reviewing Liam's evening journal. The nurse on the other end of the line was polite, but her words were pointed. "I'm calling regarding the recent decrease in therapy sessions for your son," she said. "It's been noted that non-certified personnel are now spending extended, unsupervised time with Liam." Alexander's tone was sharp. "You mean Amelia?" "Yes, sir. I understand she's a nanny, not a licensed therapist. We've received concerns from the facility. Some of the staff believe this might disrupt the progress of more structured treatments." Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. "Progress? He hasn't progressed in years. Not until she came." The nurse hesitated. "I understand your frustration, but if we are to continue under the current care plan, certain protocols must be respected. Otherwise, we may need to reevaluate our involvement." He hung up without another word. Amelia looked up, concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," he muttered. "They're threatening to pull his care if I don't limit your time with him." She blinked, stunned. "But I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not replacing anyone." "You're just doing what no one else could," he said bitterly. "And that's exactly why they're afraid. They can't explain this. You don't fit in their data sheets." Amelia swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" Alexander looked at her, something fierce burning in his eyes. "I protect him. And I protect you." But even as he said it, a shadow loomed in his mind, because there was another person who hadn't yet reappeared, someone who could unravel everything if she found out what was happening now. Elizabeth's mother, Liam's maternal grandmother. She had cut ties with Alexander after the accident, blaming him for her daughter's death, refusing to even acknowledge Liam's condition. And if she caught wind that someone new had stepped into a maternal role, there could be war. And Alexander knew deep down that Amelia's presence wasn't just healing something in Liam, it was waking up ghosts that hadn't been laid to rest. 3 days later, the past arrived in the form of a silver car and a knock at the door. Amelia had just finished Liam's afternoon reading when the butler appeared at the doorway, his face pale. "Mr. Vale, there's a visitor." Alexander stepped into the foyer, and the moment he saw the woman standing just beyond the threshold, every muscle in his body tensed. Vivian Hartwell, Elizabeth's mother. She was dressed immaculately, as always, her pearl earrings, her structured blazer, her rigid posture like armor. Her eyes, cold and assessing, scanned the grand entrance of the Vale estate as if seeing it for the first time in years. "Vivian," Alexander said, keeping his tone even. "This is unexpected." She raised an eyebrow. "So was the call I received from the therapy center. Something about a nanny interfering with my grandson's care." He clenched his jaw. "Liam is doing better than he has in years." Her expression sharpened. "And what miracle worker should I thank for that?" Before he could respond, Amelia stepped forward from the hallway, unaware of who stood in the foyer. She paused when she saw Vivian. Vivian turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the young woman. Amelia extended a polite hand. "Hello, But Vivian didn't take it. "I know who you are. I had your background checked the moment I heard your name." Alexander moved protectively toward Amelia. That's enough. But Vivian's gaze didn't waver. Do you think I don't recognize her? The eyes, the voice. She's her mother's daughter. Amelia's face went pale. You knew my mother? She asked softly. Vivian nodded slowly. Oh yes, she was here. Once, briefly. Long enough to make an impression. Amelia glanced at Alexander, who gave a slight shake of his head. He didn't know this part, not all of it. Vivian stepped closer, her voice cool. What I don't understand is why you're here now, in this house, with my grandson. Amelia looked her in the eye. Because he needs someone who remembers what love sounds like. That struck something, a tiny crack in Vivian's perfect armor. But before anything more could be said, Liam's voice broke the silence. It was faint, barely audible. Mama! Everyone froze. Amelia's eyes welled. Alexander's breath caught. Vivian turned sharply toward the hallway where Liam sat, eyes wide and lips parted. It was the first word he had spoken in 3 years, and he had spoken it while looking at Amelia. The room stood still as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Vivian turned slowly, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she looked at Liam, whose lips still hovered between motion and memory. Mama! It was only a whisper, a fragile breath of a word, but for Alexander it roared louder than any boardroom applause he'd ever known. He rushed to his son's side, kneeling so that they were eye to eye. Liam, say it again, please. Liam didn't respond. His gaze, though, was locked on Amelia. His lower lip quivered. Vivian approached cautiously, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She stared at the boy and then at Amelia, suspicion battling with something else, something older, more buried. He spoke, she murmured. After all this time, Alexander stood. Because of her. Vivian crossed her arms. You think I'm going to believe some girl singing lullabies is why my grandson suddenly speaks again? That's not science, Alexander. That's wishful thinking. No, he replied. It's love, and it's working. Amelia remained quiet. She felt the weight of Vivian's stare, the implication in her voice. She knew this moment was bigger than the word Liam had spoken. It was a challenge, an unspoken question. Who are you to this boy? Later that night, after Vivian had left with a cool goodbye and a promise to look into things further, Amelia stood on the back porch. The garden lights cast long shadows on the stone path. She gripped the railing, trying to process what had just happened. She hadn't meant for any of this. She came here looking for answers, maybe even to repay something owed to her mother's memory. But what she found was more than a child needing comfort. It was a boy who had held his pain in silence for so long that it had nearly swallowed him. And now, with one word, he had reached out. Not for Alexander, not for Vivian, but for her. Inside, Alexander watched her through the glass door. He could feel the questions stacking inside him like bricks, each one heavier than the last. But there was one he could no longer ignore. Who was Amelia Grace, really? And why did his son look at her like she'd always belonged to him? The next morning began under a veil of tension. Vivian hadn't called, but her presence lingered like perfume in an empty room, elegant, unsettling, unforgettable. Alexander sipped his coffee in silence, eyes scanning the news headlines without absorbing a single word. Across the kitchen, Amelia moved quietly, preparing Liam's breakfast as if everything were normal. But nothing was. Not after that word. Not after Mama. I want to show you something, Alexander said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Amelia looked up. Okay. He led her to the archive room, an unused space on the second floor lined with boxes of old documents, photos, and memories sealed in dust. He flicked on the lights and walked straight to a small trunk in the corner. He knelt and opened it. Inside were Elizabeth's journals. He pulled one out, leather-bound and worn, and handed it to Amelia. She wrote constantly, he said. Everything. Even when she couldn't talk to me, she wrote. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to read them. I didn't want to know what I might have missed. Amelia hesitated before opening the journal. The first few pages were filled with elegant cursive, poetic, raw, and intimate. Then one entry stopped her cold. I hear the lullaby in my dreams now. Not my voice. Hers. Marlene. It's strange the way she disappeared. I miss her more than I expected. She understood Liam before I even knew him. Sometimes I wonder if I pushed her away because I saw something in her I was too afraid to face. Amelia looked up, stunned. Alexander leaned over, reading with her. They turned the page. There's something in Liam's eyes lately. He looks for her, and I can't compete with that. I'm his mother. But she sang him into peace before I could even hold him. What does that say about me? Amelia's hand trembled as she closed the journal. Alexander stared at her. She didn't hate your mother. No, Amelia whispered. She felt replaced by her. He nodded slowly. And now, history is repeating itself. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke it out loud, but the truth sat between them like a weight. Liam had found comfort in Amelia, something deep, primal, unspoken. And Alexander, for all his power and logic, was beginning to feel it too. Not just gratitude, but connection, the kind that could break a man open or save him completely. That afternoon, the house felt heavier, as though it too carried the weight of words long unspoken. Amelia sat beside Liam's wheelchair on the veranda, a sketch pad in her lap, a set of colored pencils scattered between them. The air was warm, scented with lavender from the garden. She was drawing slowly, narrating each stroke as she worked. "This is you," she said, sketching a small figure. "In the treehouse. You're smiling." Liam's eyes followed the motion of her hand, his lips parted ever so slightly. His fingers twitched once, a soft flex of the right hand. "Do you like it?" she asked. No response, but his gaze didn't leave the page. Amelia smiled softly, brushing her fingers lightly against his knuckles. "I used to draw with my mom. She'd tell me stories while we colored. She had the gentlest voice." Liam blinked slowly. Then, without warning, a tear slid down his cheek. Amelia froze. She reached for a tissue and gently dabbed his face, her voice soothing. "It's okay, you don't have to hold it in. Not with me." Inside, Alexander watched from the window, his heart constricting. Every day he saw his son inch closer to life. And every day he saw Amelia becoming more essential to it. And that terrified him. Not because he distrusted her, but because he didn't know what he would do if she left. That night, after Liam was asleep, Alexander knocked on Amelia's door. She opened it hesitantly, still in her soft cardigan, a book in hand. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Of course." He hesitated. "Do you plan on staying?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean long term. This house, Liam, me, all of it. Is this temporary for you?" Amelia lowered her gaze. "I came here looking for my mother's past, but I found Liam. And he feels like family." Alexander exhaled slowly. "That's what I'm afraid of." Her brows knit. "Afraid?" "Because I've lost family before," he said, voice quieter now, "and every time something good happens in this house, it disappears." She stepped closer. "I'm not planning to disappear." He met her eyes, something raw in his own. "Then tell me why it feels like you were always meant to be here." Amelia didn't answer right away, because deep down, she didn't know either. Only that something in Liam's eyes mirrored something in her own. Like two lost pieces, finally recognizing each other. Vivienne returned unannounced the next morning, her heels echoing through the grand foyer like thunder. She wasn't alone this time. A man in a charcoal suit followed behind her, carrying a slim briefcase and wearing a cautious, professional smile. Alexander met them near the staircase, his posture rigid. "What is this?" Vivienne didn't bother with pleasantries. "This is Dr. Marcus Heron. He's a specialist in pediatric neurodevelopmental trauma. I've arranged for him to evaluate Liam personally. Alexander's jaw tensed. You didn't ask. I didn't need to, she replied coldly. I'm still his grandmother. And this experiment with the nanny has gone on long enough. Before Alexander could respond, Amelia appeared at the top of the stairs. She descended slowly, her expression calm but firm. I assume this evaluation doesn't include me, she said. Vivienne turned to her. No, it doesn't, and frankly, you've already overstepped. Dr. Heron raised a hand politely. I'd like to observe the current routine before making any recommendations. Fine, Alexander said stiffly, but he's not a lab rat. You go at his pace. You follow our lead. The doctor nodded. The next hour was tense. Dr. Heron observed from a quiet distance as Amelia went through Liam's daily interactions. Soft music, sensory toys, gentle storytelling. At first, Liam was stiff, withdrawn, barely responding. But then Amelia began to hum the lullaby, and slowly Liam's head tilted. His eyes found hers. His fingers moved. It was subtle, fragile, but real. Afterward, the doctor sat in the library, scribbling notes. Vivienne paced nearby. Well, she demanded. Dr. Heron looked up. Frankly, I'm astonished. I've reviewed this boy's records. By all accounts, he shouldn't be making these kinds of neurological responses. And yet, Alexander pressed. And yet, Dr. Heron said slowly, he is. I can't explain it with data, but something about her, he glanced at Amelia, is reaching him, Vivienne scoffed. So what? We hand over his rehabilitation to an amateur with a soft voice? No, the doctor replied, but I wouldn't remove her from the equation, not unless you want to risk setting him back. Vivienne turned away, arms crossed tightly. Alexander stepped forward. You're not taking her out of his life. Not again. Vivienne didn't answer, but in her silence something was cracking, because even she had seen the truth, and it looked a lot like a boy choosing to live again because of the woman no one expected. That evening the house was unusually quiet. The storm that had brewed earlier between Alexander and Vivienne had passed, but the air still felt heavy, like a dam had cracked, yet hadn't fully burst. Amelia sat in the nursery, where Liam had been moved temporarily to make him feel safer after the emotional tension of the day. She hummed softly, running her fingers through his hair. He looked peaceful, eyes half-lidded, his small hand resting on hers. Alexander entered the room quietly, carrying a small wooden box. He knelt beside them, eyes fixed on his son. I found this in the attic, he said. It belonged to Elizabeth. He opened the lid. Inside was a folded letter, written in delicate handwriting. Amelia gently took it, her voice soft. Are you sure? He nodded. She unfolded the paper and read aloud. If you're reading this, it means you found what I hid away. I knew there would be a day when I wouldn't be able to say these things out loud. I hope you'll forgive me. I asked Marlene to leave because I was scared. Not of her, but of how much Liam loved her, of how natural it was for him to turn to her when he cried. I felt invisible, and I couldn't admit that the woman I trusted most and made me feel like I wasn't enough. Amelia's voice broke slightly. Alexander reached over, covering her hand with his. She continued. But she was good and kind, and when she left, something in this house went silent. I always thought I'd have time to fix it, to tell her I understood. I never did. So if her daughter is reading this, please know that you are welcome in this home. Not as a servant, not even as a caretaker, but as someone who already belongs. Tears ran freely down Amelia's cheeks now. Alexander closed his eyes, overwhelmed, and then a sound, Liam's voice, barely above a whisper. Stay. Amelia turned to him. His eyes were open, watching her, soft and vulnerable. I'm here, she whispered, touching his cheek. Alexander's throat tightened. Did he just? Amelia nodded through her tears. He asked me to stay. Alexander knelt beside them both, one hand on his son's shoulder, the other on Amelia's. And for the first time in years, He didn't feel like he was standing in a broken family. He felt like one was beginning again, piece by piece, word by word. And Liam's voice, small, fragile and real, was leading them home. Weeks passed, and the house transformed in quiet, invisible ways. Liam now responded to music without hesitation. His right hand, once immobile, could grip Amelia's fingers for a few seconds at a time. His eyes followed her voice like it was a string tied to his soul. Alexander, once a distant observer, had started reading aloud to his son every night, his voice catching when Liam blinked slowly in response or offered the faintest smile. But despite the progress, an unease lingered. Vivian had gone silent since the doctor's visit. No more surprise appearances, no cryptic messages, nothing. Alexander knew her well enough to understand what that meant. She was planning something. One rainy afternoon, Amelia found herself in the library, organizing the old music books with Liam beside her. The fire crackled nearby. As she tucked a thin manuscript into a shelf, her hand brushed a thin folder she hadn't noticed before. It was wedged deep between two books. She pulled it out. No label, no date. Curious, she opened it and froze. Inside were printed emails. Correspondence between Elizabeth and someone named J.H., dated just 2 months before her death. Amelia's breath caught as she scanned the messages. He can never know the full story, Joe. Not about the accident, not about the call. If he does, it'll destroy him. Another message. You promised. Keep Marlene away from this. I'm doing what I can. But if it all comes out, God help us. Amelia's hands trembled. She read further, piecing together fragments. Talk of a phone call the night of the crash, an unspoken agreement, and Elizabeth begging this person not to reveal something to Alexander. Suddenly, it wasn't just about her mother anymore. Something had been hidden from Alexander. Something that made Elizabeth lie, manipulate, even erase people from Liam's life. And if Amelia had found this by accident, how long until someone found it on purpose? She stood abruptly, grabbing the folder. Liam stirred slightly in his chair. It's okay, she whispered, crouching beside him. I need to talk to your dad. Because this wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about truth. And Amelia had just stepped on a landmine buried in the past, one that could fracture the fragile trust growing between them all. Alexander sat in his study, eyes heavy from a morning of paperwork and too little sleep. The rain outside tapped steadily against the windows, a rhythmic reminder of time slipping by. He hadn't expected Amelia to enter so suddenly, let alone with a look of such urgency on her face. I found something, she said, not waiting for an invitation. She placed the folder on his desk and stepped back. He looked at it, then at her. What is this? Emails. Between Elizabeth and someone named J.H. I found them wedged in the music books. I think she was hiding something. About the accident. He opened the folder slowly. His eyes scanned the words in disbelief, the steady drumming of rain swallowed by the silence that followed. Elizabeth's words were frantic, coded in fear. Mentions of a phone call, the night of the accident. A plea to keep Marlene away from this. References to keeping the family intact. Alexander's hands went cold. Why would she lie to me about the crash? He muttered. Amelia's voice was gentle. I don't know, but there's more. Look at this one. She pointed to a particular email. He'll think it was just bad weather. He'll never forgive me if he knows I told her not to drive until I got the answer. Alexander's chest tightened. Told her not to drive. Who? He whispered. I think she's talking about your wife. Elizabeth tried to stop someone from going somewhere, and someone went anyway. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. The night Elizabeth died, she called me. I was in a meeting. She sounded shaken. She said she'd explain when I got home. He never got the explanation, only the crash, only the silence. And now, a buried trail of messages suggesting there had been more. Amelia stepped closer. We need to find out who J.H. is. He nodded slowly. If Elizabeth was covering something up, if that night wasn't what I thought it was. His voice trailed off. Amelia watched him with quiet empathy. This isn't about blame. It's about closure. He looked up at her. For the first time, the grief in his eyes wasn't numb. It was alive, raw, and searching. And Amelia understood something in that moment. For Alexander, the pain of Elizabeth's death had never faded. He had simply buried it beneath duty, silence, and the hollow hope that no new truth could change what had already been lost. But now, it might. The next day, Alexander made a call he hadn't dared make in years. He sat in his car outside the city, the folder of emails tucked beside him on the passenger seat. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he could see the ivy-covered building, an upscale rehabilitation center that also doubled as a long-term care facility. Discreet, quiet, the kind of place you sent people you didn't want the world to see. Inside, he walked past the reception desk with a nod. "I'm here to see Joanna Halbridge," the name from the emails. The receptionist checked a list, then gave a curt nod. "She's in the garden wing, end of the hall, room 12. He hadn't seen Joanna in years. She had once been Elizabeth's best friend, her confidant. After the funeral, she vanished. No calls, no condolences, no explanation. Room 12 was quiet. The door was ajar. He knocked once and stepped inside. Joanna sat by the window in a wicker chair, a worn paperback in her lap. Her hair was streaked with grey now, but her eyes, those piercing, guarded eyes, were the same. "Alex," she said without surprise, "it's been a while." He nodded. "I found the emails." Her face didn't change, but her hands tightened around the book. "I figured you would, eventually. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I promised her I wouldn't." He stepped forward. "What happened the night she died?" Joanna closed the book. Her voice was steady, but low. "Elizabeth had a meeting scheduled. Someone was coming to the house. Someone she didn't want you to know about." "Who?" Joanna shook her head. "A lawyer, private, off record. She said she was updating her will. Something had changed, and she didn't want to wait." Alexander's heart pounded. "Changed how?" "She didn't tell me everything. Only that she'd discovered something about the accident 3 years earlier, Liam's accident. She thought someone had lied, and she believed it had something to do with Marlene." He stared at her, stunned. "She thought someone caused the crash." "She didn't say that. Just that something didn't add up. She had a gut feeling. She wanted answers, and she asked me to stay silent until someone else found the truth." Alexander sank into a nearby chair, the weight of it all settling like concrete in his chest. "She died trying to protect us," he said quietly, "but she also died keeping us in the dark." Joanna looked at him with tired eyes. "She loved you. But she didn't trust how much the truth might break you." Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, Alexander felt the first drop of a storm that had waited far too long to come. When Alexander returned home that evening, the house seemed quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that follows a sudden shift when something is missing, but you can't yet name what. He walked through the halls with the folder in hand, his steps purposeful, but his mind spiraling. He found Amelia in the music room, seated at the grand piano with Liam beside her. She wasn't playing, just tracing the keys with one finger while telling him a story. When she looked up and saw Alexander's face, her expression darkened instantly. "You found her," she said. He nodded and handed her the folder. "Joanna Halbridge, Elizabeth's closest friend. She told me something I wasn't prepared for." Amelia listened carefully as he recounted the conversation. Elizabeth's suspicions, the late-night meeting with a lawyer, the hidden changes to her will. When he finished, the silence in the room felt colder than it had before. "She thought someone had lied about Liam's accident," Amelia said, processing the weight of it. "She thought Marlene knew something," Alexander added. "Or was caught in the middle." Amelia's face stiffened. "My mother always said she left to protect someone. But I always assumed she meant me." Alexander sat down across from her. "Maybe she meant Liam." Amelia stared at the piano, lost in thought. "Then the accident wasn't just an accident." "That's what Elizabeth feared," he replied. And she died without knowing the truth. Liam let out a small soft sound, a breathy sigh that caught both their attention. His eyes shifted between them, as if sensing their tension. Amelia leaned over and gently touched his cheek. "It's okay, sweetheart. We are just trying to help each other understand." Alexander looked at them, then at the music room's polished floors. "There's more." Amelia turned to him. "She had a second version of the will drafted," he said. "Joanna didn't know what was in it. But the lawyer never showed up. Elizabeth left to meet him that night, and that's when the crash happened." "You think she was going to change custody?" Amelia asked, her voice tight. Alexander's expression didn't answer, but his silence did. They sat in that heavy realization, the shadows around them stretching as the sun disappeared. Whatever Elizabeth had planned, it never made it to paper. And now, the truth was scattered, half in memory, half in mystery. But something in Alexander's voice said he wasn't going to let it stay buried any longer. Not for Elizabeth, not for Liam, and not for the woman whose voice had brought both of them back to life. Later that night, Amelia found herself drawn to Elizabeth's old room, now sealed for years, left untouched like a frozen memory. Alexander had given her the key earlier without a word, just a look, a quiet invitation into the last sacred space of his past. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. The curtains were drawn, letting moonlight pour in through sheer fabric. Everything remained as Elizabeth had left it, the vanity untouched, perfume bottles still arranged in perfect order, a scarf draped over the armchair by the window. Amelia's gaze fell on the writing desk. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing over a stack of old notebooks. Inside the drawer, tucked in the back, she found a leather journal tied with a ribbon, different from the others. Older. She untied it and opened to the first page. There, in Elizabeth's careful handwriting, was a title, "For When the Silence Ends." Her heart raced. She flipped through pages, journal entries, poetry, fragments of thoughts that bled grief, guilt, and love in equal measure. But one entry stood out. "I'm terrified that Marlene knew what I couldn't admit, that Liam's accident wasn't fate, that it was someone's choice." Amelia's fingers tightened on the paper. "And if that's true, then who was it meant for?" She sat down slowly, eyes still scanning the lines. It was a question that echoed through the walls of the house. Downstairs, Alexander sat at his desk, replaying the details in his mind. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was a scanned image, a legal document, dated the same day Elizabeth died, a revision to her will. The second beneficiary listed was not him. It was Amelia Grace. He stared at the screen, stunned. The music box in his study began playing softly, set on a timer. And as its melody filled the room, so did a truth too big to ignore. Elizabeth had known about Amelia. She had tried to bring her back, and now, with every note, every word, every whispered murmur from Liam's lips, she was succeeding even in death. But what Alexander didn't know yet, what neither of them knew, was that the person Elizabeth feared had never disappeared, and they were about to make their move. The next morning dawned deceptively calm. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the garden outside shimmered with dew. But inside the Vale estate, an undercurrent of tension pulsed just beneath the surface. Alexander sat at the breakfast table, the legal document from the anonymous number still burned into his thoughts. He hadn't shown it to Amelia yet, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wasn't sure what it meant. Why would Elizabeth add Amelia to her will? What had she known, and when? Amelia entered the room with Liam beside her, guiding his chair with practiced ease. She looked tired, haunted even. Last night's journal discovery had shaken something loose in her, and it hadn't settled since. "I need to tell you something," she said softly as she sat down across from Alexander. "I found another journal, in Elizabeth's room." He straightened in his seat, listening closely. "She suspected someone," Amelia continued. "She didn't name them, but she thought Liam's accident might not have been random. She wrote, 'Who was it meant for?'" Alexander's eyes darkened. "So she thought it was deliberate, an attempt." Amelia nodded. "Yes, but not necessarily on Liam. Maybe on someone else. He exhaled sharply, pushing his plate away. If someone tampered with that car, we need proof. She hesitated, then added, and there's more. The music box, the lullaby. It was meant to lead me back. He looked up at her, eyebrows furrowed. I think Elizabeth knew about my mother's connection to Liam. Maybe she suspected more than she ever said aloud, and she wanted me to find it. Alexander went quiet. His mind raced through old memories, the way Elizabeth would stare out the window in silence, her sudden dismissals of people without explanation, her protectiveness after Marlene left. And then, as if summoned by the rising tension, the butler appeared at the doorway. "Sir," he said, hesitant, "there's someone here asking to speak with you. She claims to have information about the night of the accident." "Who is it?" Alexander asked. The butler's eyes flickered toward Amelia before he answered. "She says her name is Vanessa Lorne, a nurse from the hospital. She was on duty the night Elizabeth died." Amelia's breath caught. Alexander stood. Because if this woman truly held the answers they needed, then the next few minutes could unravel everything they thought they knew. Vanessa Lorne stood in the foyer, hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes flickering across the ornate architecture with cautious curiosity. She looked to be in her mid-40s, her expression lined with years of holding things in. When Alexander and Amelia entered, she straightened immediately. "Mr. Vale," she said with a faint nod. "And you must be Amelia." "Yes," Amelia replied softly, already sensing the weight behind this visit. Alexander gestured toward the sitting room. "Please, let's talk." Once seated, Vanessa didn't waste time. "I worked the ER night shift for 12 years, but I remember that night like it just happened." She glanced down at her hands. "Elizabeth Vale came in conscious, barely. She was bleeding badly, but she kept asking for someone named Joanna." Amelia's heart skipped. "She kept saying it wasn't supposed to happen like that," Vanessa continued. "She said they weren't the target. They weren't supposed to be in the car." Alexander leaned forward. "Who did she mean?" "I don't know," Vanessa said. "But then she asked to see her son. We told her he wasn't brought in. She panicked. She started crying. Then she said, 'Tell Alex, forgive him, and protect the girl.'" Amelia's breath caught. "Protect the girl?" "Yes." Vanessa's voice softened. "I didn't understand it then. I thought she meant a daughter, maybe a child we didn't know about. But later, when I saw the obituary, something about it felt off, like a secret was buried with her." Alexander turned to Amelia slowly, his mind piecing it together. Elizabeth knew something. She believed Liam was never the target. But then, who was? Amelia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe me." Vanessa looked at her. There was another thing. A man came to the hospital that night. He claimed to be Elizabeth's lawyer, said she had requested her belongings be handed directly to him. He took her purse and phone before security could check the contents. We didn't think much of it. He had credentials. But when we tried to verify later, there was no record of him at the firm. Alexander's fists clenched. He erased her phone. "And whatever was in that purse," Vanessa added, "he vanished, no trace." A silence followed, heavy and electric. Because now the implications were undeniable. Someone wanted Elizabeth silenced, someone who knew she had planned to reveal the truth, and someone who, for years, had remained hidden in the background, watching, waiting, and maybe still close. The storm that had hovered at the edge of their lives was now pressing in. That night, Alexander barely spoke. He stood by the window of his study for hours, watching the wind rustle the garden leaves, gripping the envelope with Elizabeth's amended will in one hand and Vanessa's contact card in the other. Amelia sat nearby, reading through the final journal again, hoping for something she'd missed. One name, one hint. "They weren't the target," she whispered aloud. "If not Liam, and not Elizabeth." Alexander turned, his voice hollow. "Then who was?" She looked up, her eyes wide. What if it was you? He paused. The idea struck him with disturbing logic. Elizabeth had known someone was trying to hurt her family. She'd taken Liam out for the day, a last-minute change in plans. She was the one who drove the car, but originally that trip had been meant for Alexander. She'd insisted he work late, urged him to stay at the office. He sank into his chair. She diverted me on purpose. Amelia nodded slowly. She saved your life and lost hers. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Amelia leaned forward. What about the man who took her purse? What if that wasn't just a cover-up? What if he's still around, watching? Alexander rubbed his forehead. Then he's been one step ahead of us for years, which means... He stopped. Amelia's brow furrowed. What? There's only one person who had constant access to Elizabeth's schedule, knew the layout of this house, knew when I'd be working late. Amelia's eyes widened in realization. No, she whispered. It couldn't be. Alexander stood abruptly. Where's Ethan? Ethan Vale, his younger half-brother, the only other surviving member of the Vale family bloodline. Estranged, ambitious, quietly resentful of Alexander's power and inheritance. He had disappeared after Elizabeth's funeral. No one had heard from him since. Are you saying... Amelia couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying he always wanted what I had. The company, the house, the family name, and Elizabeth knew it. She warned me once, not directly, but she said, Ethan's hunger scares me. Amelia's voice cracked. But to orchestrate something like that... He wouldn't have done it alone, Alexander said, pacing now. He would have used someone, paid them, covered his tracks. Amelia rose. Then we have to find him, before he decides his plan isn't finished. They looked at each other, no more secrets between them. Only one, undeniable truth. The threat wasn't in the past. It was still alive, and closing in. The search began with silence. Ethan Vale had scrubbed his digital presence years ago. No active accounts, no known addresses, no recent financial activity tied to the family. But Alexander wasn't starting from scratch. He had access to private investigators, legal contacts, and a grim determination. He sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a clipped tone to a man named Harrington, his most trusted security consultant. I need everything on Ethan. Last known associates, offshore accounts, anything that pings. Start with Geneva. That's where he last used the company jet. Across the hall, Amelia packed a small overnight bag. She had insisted on staying close to Liam. Whatever was coming, she wouldn't leave him. Downstairs, the butler, Mr. Ferris, stepped into the study, clearing his throat. Sir, there's a letter. No stamp. Delivered by hand. No one saw who brought it. Alexander's pulse quickened. He took the envelope and opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed. You were never supposed to find her. Stop digging, or next time you lose more than silence. No signature, no fingerprints, but the message was unmistakable. He called Amelia into the room and handed her the note. Her hands trembled. He's watching us. Alexander's voice dropped. Not just us, Liam too. Amelia looked toward the staircase, fear flashing in her eyes. That night, they placed extra security at the estate. Alexander personally reviewed the surveillance system. Amelia moved a cot into Liam's room. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Just before midnight, Liam stirred. His lips moved faintly. Amelia leaned in. What is it, sweetheart? Dark. Man, he whispered, eyes unfocused. She froze. What man? Liam's hand twitched. Scary. In the hall. I saw him. Amelia's blood ran cold. She rushed to the hallway. Empty. Nothing on the monitors. But Liam hadn't spoken in riddles before. Not once. She returned to the study where Alexander sat staring at the letter. We need to be ready, she said. He nodded, rising from the chair. We are. But even as he said it, a shadow moved silently outside the estate gates. Watching. Waiting. And inside, none of them knew that the final piece had already been set in motion. The next move wouldn't be a warning. It would be an arrival. It happened just after dawn. The estate gates, always locked and under surveillance, stood ajar. A silent alarm had been triggered at 6:17 a.m., but no guard had responded. When Alexander checked the security feed, the cameras had frozen, just for 6 minutes, enough time for someone to slip through, enough time for the past to walk in. Amelia had fallen asleep beside Liam's bed, one hand wrapped around his. She woke to the sound of footsteps outside the room, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be Ferris or one of the nurses. She stood quickly and opened the door and froze. A man stood at the end of the hallway, silhouetted against the pale light filtering through the stained glass window. Tall, dressed in black, face calm, eyes cold. "Hello, Amelia," he said. She didn't know him, but somehow she did. "Ethan," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "So she found you after all. My dear sister-in-law was always too sentimental." Alexander appeared at the top of the stairs behind him. His voice thundered. "Don't take another step." Ethan turned, unfazed. "Ah." There he is, the Golden Sun, still guarding his broken kingdom. Alexander moved slowly, deliberately. "This isn't yours, Ethan. It never was." "No," Ethan said, "but it should have been. You got everything. The company, the house, the legacy. And what did I get? A name no one respected. A family that pretended I didn't exist." "You tried to kill my wife," Alexander said, fists clenched. "You almost killed Liam." "That wasn't the plan," Ethan snapped, mask slipping. "It was supposed to be you." "You were supposed to be in the car." Amelia stepped forward. "Elizabeth knew. She changed her will." "I know," Ethan replied. "Too late. You're here now. And if I can't erase her memory..." Alexander drew a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The hall lights flickered, then roared to life. Guards rushed in from both ends, surrounding Ethan. He didn't resist, just stood there, smiling faintly, as if he'd known it would end this way. "You think you've won?" he said to Alexander. "You haven't. You're just a man clinging to ghosts." Alexander walked toward him, his voice low. "No, I'm a father. And this time, I didn't ignore the signs." As the guards led Ethan away, Amelia turned back to Liam's room. The boy was awake, eyes wide, watching her. And as she knelt beside him, he whispered something she hadn't expected. "Safe." One word, one final release. And in that moment, as the door closed on a past long buried, Amelia knew the house wasn't just healing. It was beginning again, with truth, with voice, with family rediscovered, not by blood or title, but by love.